There's a surprisingly simple way to lower your blood glucose after a meal, and it has nothing to do with changing what you ate, starting a new medication, or counting every carbohydrate on your plate. It costs nothing, it requires no gym, no equipment, no perfect fitness history, and it works even when insulin isn't cooperating. Most people living with high blood sugar have never had a doctor sit them down and explain this clearly, which is exactly why I'm making this video. The method is light movement right after you eat. Not punishment, not boot camp exercise, not an hour on the treadmill, just light activity in the window right after a meal. And for a lot of people, this creates an immediate, measurable difference in post-meal glucose, starting with the very first time they try it. High blood sugar after a meal is not random. It's the result of three things happening at once. First, glucose is entering your bloodstream from the food you just ate, and your muscle cells aren't pulling it in efficiently. Second, your liver may be adding extra glucose on top of that because insulin resistance is giving it the wrong signal. Third, the cellular machinery that handles glucose disposal is impaired because fat has accumulated inside muscle and liver cells and jammed the very mechanism insulin needs to work. Most people only ever hear about the first one. Nobody explains the second or the third, and that's exactly what this video is going to fix. If you want our free video walkthrough to start improving insulin sensitivity step by step, comment training below and we'll send you the link to join. It's completely free. Comment training below. Now let's get into the physiology. When you eat carbohydrates, fruit, potatoes, oats, beans, rice, any whole food, your digestive system breaks that food down into glucose, which enters your bloodstream. That is normal. That is biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. Then insulin is released, and insulin acts like a key. It travels to your muscle and liver cells and signals them to open up and let glucose in. In a metabolically healthy body, that glucose moves efficiently into muscle cells, gets used for energy, or stored as glycogen, and blood sugar rises and returns to baseline in a smooth, organized way. But when you're insulin resistant, the key doesn't work as well. And here's the part nobody tells you. The reason it often doesn't work is not because you ate a banana. It's because fat has accumulated inside your muscle and liver cells. Think of it like someone putting crazy glue into a lock. The key is still there. The door is still there, but the mechanism is jammed. Intramyocellular fat in muscle and excess fat in the liver interfere directly with insulin signaling, meaning glucose has a harder time getting where it needs to go. That's insulin resistance. And carbohydrates don't cause it. They reveal it. So the question isn't, how do I eat fewer carbs? The question is, how do I fix the jammed lock? And one of the fastest answers to that question involves your muscles. Specifically, what happens when you contract them right after a meal? Here's the part most people miss. Your skeletal muscle has two ways to absorb glucose. The first is the insulin pathway. Insulin signals the cell to move glucose transporters called GLUT4 to the surface where they can pull glucose in from the bloodstream. This is the main door. And when insulin resistance is present, this door is sticky, slow, and inconsistent. But there's a second pathway, and this one doesn't need insulin at all. When your muscles contract, when you walk, climb stairs, march in place, essentially any movement, they activate a completely separate mechanism that also moves GLUT4 transporters to the cell surface. No insulin required. The side door just opens. That means even when the insulin lock is jammed, muscle contraction can still pull glucose out of your bloodstream. Your muscles become like a sponge, a glucose vacuum. And because skeletal muscle is the largest glucose sink in your entire body, this effect is not small. This is why something as small as a 10-minute walk after dinner can drop post-meal glucose when dietary changes alone aren't moving the needle. The muscle contraction is doing what insulin is struggling to do, pulling glucose off the street and into the cell where it belongs. And the timing of this matters more than most people realize. Your post-meal glucose doesn't rise slowly and evenly. Depending on your insulin sensitivity and the meal you ate, it can start climbing fast, with the peak often arriving within the first 45 to 60 minutes. If you wait until that spike is already at its height, you've missed the window where movement matters most. But if you get your muscles involved during that early post post-meal rise, you can intercept a meaningful portion of that glucose before it piles up in the bloodstream. Think of it this way. Glucose is water filling a bathtub. Your muscles, when contracting, are an open drain. You want that drain open while the water is filling, not after the tub has already overflowed. A recent study on post-meal exercise timing confirmed this directly. Researchers found that moving sooner after eating, especially after breakfast, lowered glucose more effectively than waiting longer. Earlier movement did a better job minimizing both glucose elevation and glucose fluctuations throughout the day. This isn't just theory. The evidence here is consistent, and it goes back further than most people know. A 2006 study by Hostmark and colleagues tested 39 women, both young and middle-aged, trained and sedentary, after a high glycemic cornflakes meal. On a separate day, they had the same participants do 30 minutes of light biking immediately after the meal. The post-meal glucose rise was blunted across the board, regardless of age or fitness level. Here's what that tells us. You don't need to be an athlete for this to work. You don't need a perfect fitness history. Light movement created an acute glucose lowering effect even after a rapidly absorbed high glycemic meal. The muscle contraction mechanism doesn't check your credentials before it opens the side door. It just responds to being used. But now here's where it gets even more interesting. A 2020 randomized crossover trial tested something very specific. What if you don't have time for a full walk? Researchers studied 30 normal weight adults after a mixed meal and compared stair climbing bouts lasting just 1 minute, 3 minutes, or 10 minutes. Even a single 1-minute bout reduced post-meal glucose at 45 minutes. The longer bouts had stronger effects, with the 10-minute condition producing the largest reduction in the best overall glucose response. But the critical finding is this: the body responds to muscle contraction quickly, very quickly. 1 minute, not 1 hour, 1 minute. The metabolic machinery doesn't require perfection. It requires activation. And that changes everything about how you think about fitting movement into your day. A paper by Bellini and colleagues asked a practical question that most research ignores. What actually works in real-world home and office settings? Their findings showed that walking was the most effective strategy for blunting post-meal glucose, consistently outperforming alternatives in terms of glucose area under the curve. But step-based movement and other alternatives still provided meaningful benefit. And a broader review of the field confirmed the same pattern. Walking after meals consistently attenuates the post-meal glucose response, with the greatest benefit when movement begins as soon as possible after eating rather than being delayed. Why does that matter? Because real life is messy. Sometimes you can go outside and walk. Sometimes you're in an office with back-to-back calls. Sometimes dinner ends and you have dishes, kids, errands, and life coming at you from 6 different directions. The research tells you clearly walking is the star player, but the deeper principle is post-meal muscle activation, and that can happen in a hallway, on a staircase, or marching in place in your kitchen. The goal isn't to look impressive. The goal is to keep the drain open while the tub is filling. Now, here's the part most people miss about this entire conversation. Post-meal walking is one of the most elegant and underused tools in blood sugar management, but it's not the whole answer. And I want to be clear about that. If someone keeps eating a diet high in saturated fat, continues accumulating excess fat inside muscle and liver cells, sleeps poorly, lives under chronic stress, and never addresses the root cause of insulin resistance, a short walk after meals is not going to override all of that. One tool used in isolation often feels disappointing, not because the tool doesn't work, but because it's doing its job while everything else fights against it. But when you combine post-meal movement with a low-fat, plant-based, whole food eating pattern rich in legumes, intact whole grains, fruit, potatoes, non-starchy vegetables, and fiber, you start attacking the problem from both sides simultaneously. The food reduces the fat burden inside muscle and liver cells, slowly clearing the glue out of the lock. The movement activates the side door so glucose can exit the bloodstream even while the main door is still stiff. That's how you restore carbohydrate tolerance, not by running from carbs, by making your body better at processing them. And this is why so many people get trapped in a frustrating loop. They see glucose rise after oatmeal, after rice, after fruit, and they conclude the food is the problem. But that spike isn't evidence that carbohydrates cause diabetes. It's evidence that carbohydrate tolerance is impaired. That is a completely different statement. And impaired carbohydrate tolerance can improve when insulin sensitivity improves. Your body is not broken forever. It's responding to the conditions in inside your cells. Change those conditions and the response changes with them. If you want help building the full picture, the food, the movement, the strategy, comment training below. Here's what this looks like in real life. No perfection required. After breakfast, especially if mornings tend to be your worst glucose window, take a 10 to 15 minute easy walk. Comfortable pace. Nothing heroic. Just move. Research shows this is the highest leverage time of day, and moving sooner produces better results than waiting. After lunch, do the same if you can. Even 10 minutes of walking around the block, climbing stairs, or moving through your workspace activates the contraction pathway and helps clear post-meal glucose before it peaks. After dinner is where I'd pay the most attention. Most people are their most sedentary in the evening. Insulin sensitivity naturally declines later in the day, and post-dinner glucose that stays elevated can linger into the overnight hours and influence your fasting number the next morning. A 10 to 20 minute walk after dinner can interrupt that entire chain. If you can't go outside, use your stairs. March in place. Walk the hallway. Do gentle step-ups. Even 3 to 5 minutes of movement is activating the side door. Even 1 minute, as the research showed, changes the glucose curve at 45 minutes. And track it, not obsessively, not with fear, with curiosity. Have a meal, stay seated, and observe the response. On a different day, have a similar meal and walk for 10 minutes right after. Let your own physiology show you the difference. For many people, this is the moment the light bulb turns on. They realize their body is changeable, that the number on the meter is not a verdict, it's a variable. Let's zoom out, because the most powerful message here is bigger than any single walk. Light post-meal movement activates contraction-mediated GLUT4 translocation, opening a side door for glucose disposal that operates independently of insulin, even when insulin signaling is impaired. Timing matters. Earlier movement intercepts the glucose rise before it peaks, producing a flatter, more controlled post-meal response. Duration is flexible. 1 minute helps, 3 is better, 10 is best. But the body responds to activation regardless of how long the bout lasts. Walking is the most effective modality, but any form of muscle contraction after meals moves the needle in the right direction. And post-meal movement works best as part of a larger framework, one where the food itself is also reducing the fat congestion inside your cells that caused insulin resistance in the first place. None of this is magic. None of this requires suffering. It requires understanding the physiology and then working with it instead of against it. So if you've been blaming yourself for high numbers after meals, stop. If you've been blaming fruit or rice or oatmeal, redirect that energy. The target is insulin resistance. And one of the fastest ways to start nudging the system in the right direction is to use your muscles after you eat. Simple, underused, evidence-based. If you want our free walkthrough to start putting this into practice, comment training below. If this video helped you, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who's been told the only answer to high blood sugar is eating less. Until next time, keep those carbs high and that A1C low.